The palace gates have seen centuries of scandal, but none quite like this. Imagine the marble floors of Buckingham Palace echoing with silence, the same halls that once rang with laughter from a young Prince Harry now heavy with unspoken tension. And then, in the early hours of a crisp London morning, a statement appears on the official royal website. It's only a few lines long, brief, almost polite, but its impact? Devastating. With just a few carefully chosen words, King Charles draws the line that many thought he'd never cross, permanently blocking Harry and Meghan from ever using their HRH titles again. Not suspended, not under review. Gone. Forever. How did it come to this? How did the once beloved royal rebel become a symbol of royal exile? And what does this say about the future of the monarchy itself? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This isn't just a story about titles. It's a story about identity, betrayal, and a king forced to choose between blood and crown. The decision may seem symbolic to some, but inside the palace, it's far more than that. It's a declaration of war, a quiet one, waged behind velvet curtains and gilded walls, but no less destructive. Because here's the truth. The moment King Charles signed that order, the last thread connecting the Sussexes to the institution of monarchy was cut. For good. The world woke up to the headline. Social media exploded. News anchors struggled to keep up. King Charles takes decisive action, one headline read. End of an era, said another. But behind the headlines, behind the diplomatic phrasing and formal statements, there's something raw, something painfully human. A father's heartbreak, a son's defiance, and a woman's rage at the system she thought she could beat. If you've ever watched a family fall apart from the inside, you know it doesn't happen overnight. It's small fractures at first, little things said and unsaid, a dinner missed, a letter ignored, until one day, the silence becomes too loud to bear. And that's exactly what happened between King Charles and Prince Harry. It began years ago, when Harry and Meghan stepped down as working royals, announcing they'd pursue financial independence. The world called it Megxit. The couple called it freedom. But the palace called it betrayal. Still, through all the tension and headlines, their HRH titles remained, a small symbol of belonging, even from afar. That's why this latest move by the king cuts so deep. Because now, even that symbolic thread has been severed. But here's where it gets even more shocking. This decision didn't just come out of nowhere. It was months in the making, driven by a storm of private events, secret meetings, and royal warnings that the public never saw. And when you learn what truly pushed King Charles to act, what happened behind closed doors, you'll understand why this isn't about protocol. It's about power, it's about control, and it's about legacy. Picture this. The king sitting alone in his study late at night. Papers spread across his desk. A glass of scotch untouched. A single lamp flickering over decades of history and duty. He's reading reports, not about the Commonwealth or Parliament, but about his own son. His son's latest interviews, his wife's Netflix projects, their tell-all memoirs, their ongoing attacks on the family that raised him. And in that moment, something inside him snaps. The man who spent his entire life waiting to be king finally realizes he can't lead if he's constantly cleaning up after Harry's rebellion. So he makes the call. But was it justice or revenge? That's the question dividing the world right now. Some see it as a father's heartbreak, others as a monarch's revenge. And maybe it's both. Because King Charles, for all his calm demeanor, is not the soft-spoken man many thought he was. Those who've worked with him say he has a steely resolve, a quiet ruthlessness that surfaces when duty calls. And duty, in this case, meant cutting off the royal rebels before their rebellion consumed the entire crown. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in the sunny serenity of Montecito, California, Harry and Meghan wake to the storm. The first notification hits their phones, then another, then a dozen more. Their names are everywhere. Meghan reads the words out loud, her voice trembling. Their Royal Highness titles have been permanently revoked. There's a long silence. Harry doesn't say a word. He doesn't need to. His face says it all. The boy who once bowed before the Queen as His Royal Highness Prince Henry of Wales has just been erased by his own father's hand. Can you imagine that moment? Can you imagine looking at your reflection and realizing the title that once defined you, your identity, your pride, your birthright, is gone. It's more than humiliation. It's exile. And for Meghan, the loss cuts differently. For her, the titles weren't just royal, they were currency, power, branding. Without HRH, she's not the Duchess commanding royal respect on global stages. She's just Meghan Markle again, the actress, the influencer, the outsider. And she knows it. But the emotional fallout doesn't stop there. Because even as Harry and Meghan scramble to respond, the world begins to ask, what happens next? Is this the beginning of a permanent royal divide? Or is there something darker waiting beneath the surface? Something the public hasn't been told yet? Here's where the story takes a turn. Because sources inside the palace reveal this decision didn't happen overnight. It was debated, postponed, argued over for months. Some senior royals, especially Princess Anne and Prince William, urged Charles to act sooner, claiming the Sussexes were weaponizing their royal status for profit. Others, including Queen Camilla, reportedly urged caution, warning that such a harsh move could backfire emotionally. But when Harry refused to retract certain explosive claims in his memoir and continued attacking palace staff publicly, Charles had enough. The meeting that sealed their fate took place weeks ago. Private, unrecorded, only 4 people in the room. And when the final decision was made, the king's tone was cold, final, almost detached. He wasn't acting as a father that day. He was acting as the crown. Now, this is where things get even more personal. Insiders claim Charles sent Harry a private letter before the public announcement. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs. But the message was unmistakable. You chose your path, and I must protect mine. Imagine reading those words from your own father, the King of England, knowing the world would soon read between every line. But what no one expected was how Meghan would respond behind closed doors. According to insiders, she didn't break down. She didn't cry. She became calculating. Furious, yes, but focused. This wasn't the end, she told Harry. This was war. Yet even in her defiance, something in Harry began to crack. Those who know him say he's been struggling more than ever, torn between his loyalty to Meghan and his longing for home. For all the interviews, all the speeches about independence, he's still haunted by the idea that he might have gone too far, and that there's no way back. When your own father, the king, takes away your title, it's not just punishment. It's a message, you're no longer part of the family. And yet, in a strange twist, that message might be exactly what Charles intended, not to destroy his son, but to force him to reflect. Because in the monarchy, symbols matter more than emotions. Titles aren't just words. They're the invisible threads that tie the family to the institution. And when those threads break, the monarchy either collapses or strengthens. Charles is betting everything that his bold move will do the latter. But there's more, far more. Because as shocking as this decision seems, it may only be the first in a series of royal measures designed to protect the throne's future. Insiders hint that a wider reorganization is underway, one that will redefine what it means to be royal in the 21st century. And Harry and Meghan? They're the first casualties of that transformation. Now the public is split. Some applaud the king's resolve, saying he's finally standing up for the dignity of the monarchy. Others accuse him of hypocrisy, punishing his son while protecting others with darker secrets. And through it all, the one voice missing is Harry's. For now, because make no mistake, Harry isn't done. He's angry, he's wounded, and he's preparing to speak again. This time, louder, bolder, and more personal than ever before. But as he does, he risks crossing the one line from which there's no return. You might be wondering, what pushed King Charles to make this move now? What triggered such a drastic step after years of trying to keep peace? Well, according to those close to the palace, the answer lies in one explosive revelation, one private betrayal that shattered any hope of reconciliation. And once that truth comes out, the world will finally understand why the king acted the way he did. Because as the saying goes, the crown always protects itself. So, as the Sussexes retreat into silence, the palace stands firm. The HRH titles are gone. Their names are removed from official documents. Their photographs quietly shifted on the royal website. A new order begins. But this is not the end. It's only the opening act in a royal battle that's far from over. The next move, the next revelation, will come from inside the palace itself. And what it reveals will shock even the most loyal royal followers. Because just when you think King Charles has drawn the final line, something else happens behind closed doors. Something no one expected. Something that changes everything. And that's where the story truly begins. That it began with an ordinary morning in London, or at least, that's how it seemed. The sky was the usual shade of cold gray, the kind that made even Buckingham Palace look a little less golden and a little more ghostly. Staff moved through corridors with practiced quietness, unaware that history was about to be rewritten in the next few minutes. The time was 7:46 a.m. when a royal aide entered the communications office holding a sealed envelope marked for immediate release. Inside it was a short, surgical message. No embellishments, no emotion. The world would soon read. His Majesty the King has directed that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will no longer use their HRH titles in any official capacity. This decision reflects the agreement made when they stepped back from royal duties and the continuing commitment to the integrity of the monarchy. 38 words. That's all it took to send shockwaves around the globe. Within minutes, phones buzzed across every news desk in London. Editors barked orders. Cameras rolled. The BBC anchor broke into live coverage mid-sentence. "Breaking news from Buckingham Palace," she said, her tone trembling with that rare mix of disbelief and awe. "King Charles has made a historic decision regarding his son and daughter-in-law." What followed was chaos. A storm of headlines, reactions, speculation, and disbelief. It was as if the entire world had stopped for a heartbeat to absorb the unthinkable. The King of England had just exiled his own son from royal recognition. Let's pause for a second. Can you imagine the weight of that moment? To the world, it looked like a policy move. To the family, it was a declaration of war. Because here's what most people didn't realize. This announcement wasn't just about words on a website. It symbolized the cutting of the last cord that tied Harry and Meghan to the monarchy's core. Without the HRH titles, they were no longer official representatives of the crown. No privileges, no protocol, no seat in the royal order. For the first time in his life, Prince Harry was not His Royal Highness. He was just Harry. The irony was painful. For years, the couple had insisted they didn't care about titles. They claimed they wanted freedom, not formality. But the second those three letters vanished, something inside both of them broke. Because HRH wasn't just a title, it was validation. A symbol that they were still part of something bigger than themselves, even after leaving. But to understand why this moment hit so hard, we need to rewind a little. Weeks before the announcement, palace insiders noticed unusual tension in King Charles's daily schedule. Late-night meetings, phone calls with legal advisors, confidential briefings from the communications team. Every action cloaked in discretion. No one was told the full story, but everyone knew something was brewing. According to one palace aide, Charles had been reading reports detailing how the Sussexes were using their royal associations in new commercial ventures. From television deals to speaking engagements, their titles appeared subtly, sometimes explicitly, on promotional materials. It wasn't illegal, but it was infuriating to the palace, which saw it as the Sussexes cashing in on the monarchy's brand while simultaneously criticizing it. That was the breaking point. Charles reportedly asked a single question during one of those meetings. "How can I lead a modern monarchy if my own family uses it as a marketing tool?" The room fell silent. That's when he decided it was time to act. Still, the king knew the risks. Stripping titles could divide public opinion, and worse, deepen the family rift beyond repair. But Charles had reached the point where emotional hesitation gave way to royal duty. For years, he had tried to reconcile, to understand, to forgive. But Harry's explosive memoir, interviews, and TV specials had made that impossible. Each revelation wasn't just personal, it was political. And for the king, that was unacceptable. On the morning the announcement was released, courtiers gathered in small groups whispering in corners. Even senior members of staff looked stunned. One official described the atmosphere as funeral-like. Another said it felt like the monarchy just amputated one of its own limbs to survive. Outside the palace, the reaction was immediate and divided. Crowds gathered at the gates, journalists fighting for sound bites. One woman holding a small Union Jack said tearfully, "I still love Prince Harry, but maybe this had to happen." Another, less sympathetic, muttered, "Actions have consequences, even for royals." Social media exploded. #RoyalExile trended within an hour. Memes, theories, and anger filled every platform. Some accused Charles of cruelty, calling it a cold-hearted move against his own child. Others praised him for showing strength and finally ending what they saw as a never-ending royal circus. But behind the public spectacle, something much darker was happening. Inside Clarence's house, where the king now resides, a quiet meeting was already underway. Palace aides were coordinating responses for every possible outcome. Questions from Parliament, media requests, even potential legal pushback from the Sussexes camp. Charles was briefed on everything, but he said very little. According to one witness, he only asked one question: has the statement gone out? When he heard yes, he simply nodded, turned to the window, and stared out in silence. That's when the weight of the decision began to settle. He had just stripped his youngest son of the very identity that once connected them. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the reaction inside the Sussex home was very different. Sources close to the couple described the scene as chaotic. Meghan allegedly found out through a news alert before any official notice arrived. When she showed the headline to Harry, he didn't believe it at first. Then he checked his phone. Dozens of missed calls, messages from old friends, from former palace contacts, even from distant cousins he hadn't spoken to in years, all saying the same thing: it's done. Harry reportedly sat down, hands clasped, eyes glazed over. Meghan paced the room, furious, demanding answers. He can't do this, she said repeatedly. He promised he wouldn't go that far. But he could, and he did. For a moment, Harry thought about calling his father. But what could he say? He knew this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was planned, deliberate, absolute. And that's when the realization hit him. This wasn't just about Meghan. It wasn't even about the interviews or the memoir. It was about him. His father was making an example out of his own son to protect the monarchy's future. Can you imagine the sting of that realization? But here's the irony that makes this story even more haunting. In private, King Charles reportedly agonized over the decision for weeks. He wasn't heartless. He wasn't vindictive. He was conflicted. Every advisor he spoke to confirmed it. The king's face would tighten, his voice would drop, his tone would soften when Harry's name came up. "He's still my son," Charles once said quietly. "But he must understand, I am the king now." And that's the cruel paradox of monarchy. Personal feelings don't matter when duty calls. The day the announcement went public, royal historian Edward Whitmore said something chilling during a live broadcast. The king has done what monarchs before him could not. He's chosen crown over kin. It's a moment that will define his reign, for better or worse. And he's right, because history will remember this as the moment King Charles finally became more than a monarch by inheritance. He became a monarch by decision. But the story doesn't end there. Because even as London buzzed with disbelief, the royal press office received an unexpected message from Montecito. It was a short statement from the Sussex spokesperson. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex were informed of His Majesty's decision. They remain committed to their charitable work and family life. Sounds calm, right? Too calm. Because behind that polished wording, chaos was brewing. Insiders say Meghan was furious that the palace had acted without what she called proper consultation. She reportedly called it a personal vendetta disguised as royal protocol. And while Harry tried to remain composed, those close to him said he looked lost, completely hollow. Then came the interviews. Experts, commentators, royal insiders, everyone weighing in on what the decision meant. Some said it was the final nail in the coffin of reconciliation. Others believed it was a necessary step toward stability. But deep down, everyone knew one thing: the monarchy would never be the same again. The ripples spread fast. Across Europe, foreign media painted the move as both brave and brutal. In America, talk shows debated whether the king had overstepped. "Imagine cutting off your own child," one host said, "just to protect an institution." But another replied, "Imagine being a king, watching your son tear down your life's work on live TV. What would you do?" The debate wasn't just global, it was emotional. Because this story touched on something everyone understands: the impossible choice between love and responsibility. And yet, through all this noise, one chilling detail remained buried beneath the headlines. The decision to strip the Sussexes of their HRH titles wasn't just symbolic, it carried legal implications. Without HRH status, They lost certain diplomatic protections, privileges, and access to specific royal trusts. In other words, the king had ensured that their separation from the crown was complete and irreversible. Harry didn't just lose a title, he lost the safety net that came with it. So when the cameras turned to Buckingham Palace later that day, they didn't capture joy or triumph. They captured stillness, a monarchy that had just amputated one of its own branches in order to survive. And as night fell over London, the lights inside the palace stayed on. Advisors came and went. The king remained in his office long after everyone else had left. Some say he was reviewing paperwork. Others say he was simply staring at a portrait, an old one, of his two sons as boys. Maybe he wondered how it came to this. Maybe he didn't. But one thing is certain. That morning's decision was just the beginning. Because while the king believed he was protecting the monarchy, his actions had set off a chain reaction that no one, not even he, could control. And as the world debated who was right and who was wrong, one question echoed through every corner of the palace, every news desk, every family watching from home. If a king can strip his own son of his royal birthright, what will he do next? Because something else was brewing behind closed doors, something even the Sussexes didn't see coming. And when it finally came to light, it would shake not just the monarchy, but the very foundation of the royal family itself. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Before the world woke up to the statement that shattered the Sussexes' royal identity, the decision had already been sealed inside a small, wood-paneled room deep within Buckingham Palace. The door was guarded. Phones were banned. Curtains drawn. It was the kind of room where history doesn't get discussed, it gets decided. At precisely 9 p.m., 3 nights before the announcement, a single light flickered in the west wing of the palace. King Charles was already seated at the head of the long mahogany table, his face pale under the dim glow. The air was thick, not just with tension, but with finality. Around him sat Prince William, Princess Anne, and the king's most trusted private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton. No press secretaries, no advisors from the Sussex side. This was a war council, and the subject was blood. "Let's begin," Charles said, his voice quiet but commanding, the kind of tone that made everyone stop breathing for a moment. A folder sat before him, embossed with the royal crest. Inside were documents, reports, transcripts of interviews, and press analyses from around the world. Every page was a reminder of the past 4 years, the interviews, the accusations, the tears, the silence. Prince William was the first to speak. "Father, with respect, this has gone too far. Every time we try to show restraint, they twist it into weakness." His words hung in the air, and nodded slowly. "It's not just about public perception anymore. It's about the institution's survival. The monarchy can't function with 2 competing royal households, one official, one commercial." Charles listened, fingers steepled under his chin. His expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered with something deeper, pain mixed with exhaustion. "You both believe this is the only course?" "Yes," William said, leaning forward. "They've weaponized their titles. Every time Meghan signs a contract, every time Harry gives an interview, it's always the Duke and Duchess of Sussex attached. They can't have it both ways." Anne's tone was blunt, as always. "It's not cruelty. It's containment. If we don't draw a line, there will be no line left." The king's silence was deafening. He turned slightly, looking at the portrait of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, hanging above the fireplace. The woman who had dedicated her life to duty, even when it broke her heart. She'd made hard choices, too. Choices that cost her relationships, privacy, and peace. Now it was his turn. "Very well," he said finally. "Proceed." But even then, no one in that room fully grasped what this decision would unleash. Because once that order was signed, there would be no undoing it. Sir Clive opened a binder, sliding a draft of the statement across the table. "Your Majesty, this wording maintains dignity and avoids confrontation. It's firm, but not punitive." Charles read it silently. The words blurred slightly as memories flashed through his mind. Harry laughing at Sandhurst, Harry's wedding day, the image of him cradling baby Archie. Then the headlines, the documentaries, the Oprah interview. Each memory was a knife turned just a little deeper. "Remove the phrase 'in agreement with the Duke and Duchess,'" Charles said suddenly. "This isn't mutual. It's directive." The pen scratched across the paper. The tone hardened. And with that edit, the king turned compassion into command. William exhaled, satisfied. It's time. But Princess, and ever the realist, hesitated. You realize this will create a storm. They'll play the victim again. The press will devour it. Are you prepared for that? Charles's eyes met hers. I'm prepared for truth. That was it. No anger. No shouting. Just resignation. Because he knew that sometimes truth and peace cannot coexist. The meeting continued for another 42 minutes, each detail examined, each scenario discussed, how the public might react, how the Commonwealth would perceive it, how Parliament might question the move. The monarchy is not a family in the ordinary sense. It's a corporation built on centuries of symbolism. Every decision must balance emotion with optics. And this one was dynamite wrapped in diplomacy. When the clock struck 9:47, Charles signed the paper with a slow, deliberate motion. His fountain pen glided across the document like it had a life of its own. When the ink dried, his signature gleamed beneath the royal seal. William's face remained stoic, but beneath his calm exterior was something colder, a sense of triumph. For him, this wasn't revenge. It was restoration. For years, he had watched his brother tear through the family's image, one scandal at a time. Now, finally, the monarchy was taking back control, and stood and adjusted her jacket. History will understand, she said softly. Eventually. But history is rarely that kind. As the meeting ended, Charles remained seated. William and exchanged brief nods before exiting the room, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. Sir Clive gathered the documents and paused. Your Majesty, shall I schedule the release for early morning? Charles didn't look up. Yes, no earlier than sunrise. He waited until the door closed before letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Alone now, he leaned back in his chair, staring again at his mother's portrait. What would she have done? He wondered. Would she have drawn the same line? Or would she have forgiven? But forgiveness had been tried and failed. For months, Charles had sent private messages, invitations, even intermediaries to California, hoping to mend the divide. Each attempt met with silence or, worse, with leaks to the media. The king had hoped Harry would return in time, but every new headline made that hope smaller, thinner, until it finally vanished altogether. So now, there was only resolve. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, the communications team worked overnight, preparing contingency statements. They rehearsed responses for every question imaginable. Is this a permanent move? Will the Sussexes still attend royal events? Does this affect their children's status? Each answer was polished, cautious, and strategically ambiguous. That night, London slept, unaware that the monarchy was quietly redrawing its boundaries. By dawn, the official letterhead was ready, the release timed for maximum global impact. Royal correspondents received anonymous tips just minutes before the statement went live, an intentional leak to ensure the message hit every front page simultaneously. It was surgical precision, royal style. But before the final approval was given, there was one last voice that entered the room, the Queen Consort, Camilla. She had been silent throughout the process, keeping to her private quarters. But that morning, she walked into Charles's study without knocking. Her expression was unreadable. Are you certain about this? She asked quietly. Charles didn't answer immediately. He looked tired, older than his years. I have to be, he said. Camilla sighed. You know what this will do to him. To both of them. Yes, Charles replied. But I also know what not acting would do to us. She approached, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. You've always said being king meant protecting your people. Just don't forget your family is part of that too. Her words lingered in the air long after she left. When the official seal was finally stamped and the email dispatched, there was no turning back. The royal war room had done its work. Outside, the world was just beginning to stir. Inside, the monarchy was already at war with itself. By mid-morning, reports started flooding back. Public response, divided but engaged. Media coverage, relentless. Even senior politicians were caught off guard, issuing statements of no comment, while quietly scrambling to prepare for the fallout. But inside the palace, a strange calm took hold. The king attended his usual meetings, smiled for photographers, and went about his day as if nothing monumental had happened. That's the thing about monarchy. It thrives on composure, even when the ground beneath it is shaking. Still, Not everyone inside the institution was at peace. Some younger staffers whispered that the decision felt too personal. Others, loyal to the king, insisted it was overdue. The divide wasn't just outside the palace, it was within it. As evening fell, one aide reported seeing Charles alone again in his study, staring out the window toward the palace courtyard. Below, the guards marched in perfect rhythm, their discipline unbroken. But inside the king, the rhythm faltered. Because even though the war room had acted with cold efficiency, the man behind the crown was still a father, and fathers bleed, even when kings don't. Somewhere in California, Harry would soon read the news that confirmed everything was over. And the call that would follow, one that Charles didn't expect, would open wounds that no royal decree could ever close. Because if the war room thought the decision ended the battle, they were wrong. It had only just begun. And what Harry said on that private call would leave even the king in silence. The sun was still high over London when the first royal aide entered King Charles's private study, holding a slim folder of news reports and social media updates. The morning had exploded exactly as expected. Front-page headlines, opinion columns, breaking alerts flashing on screens across the world. The king didn't look up when the aide entered. He only asked one question, quiet and deliberate. Has there been any response from California? Not yet, Your Majesty. But the American networks have gone live. CNN, ABC, even the morning talk shows. It's everywhere. The king nodded once, dismissing the aide. Then, for the first time all morning, his composure cracked. He exhaled slowly, his hand trembling just slightly as he adjusted a paperweight on his desk. He knew what was coming next, the storm from across the Atlantic. Because while the palace was calm, California was about to ignite. 9 hours earlier, Montecito had been peaceful. Birds chirped, sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the Pacific breeze carried the smell of salt and lavender into the Sussexes' hillside estate. Inside the home, a breakfast meeting had just begun. Harry was on a video call with a charity coordinator. Meghan sat nearby, scrolling through her phone. A pot of English tea steamed quietly between them. Then the phone buzzed. Once, twice, then continuously. Meghan frowned, tapping the screen. At first she thought it was another tabloid rumor. But then she saw the headline. King Charles officially blocked Sussexes from using HRH titles. She froze. For a moment she thought it must be fake, a cruel twist from a gossip blog. But when she opened the BBC link, her breath caught in her throat. It was real. The crest, the formal statement, the royal seal, all of it. Harry, her voice was tight. You need to see this. He looked up, distracted, still half on his call. What is it? Read it. She slid the phone toward him. Harry's eyes scanned the screen once, then twice. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He did it. Meghan didn't answer. She didn't have to. The palace had done the one thing she'd always believed they wouldn't dare do. She grabbed her own phone and started dialing. First their lawyer, then their publicist, then one of her closest friends in Los Angeles. No one picked up fast enough. She began pacing, muttering half-sentences under her breath. They can't. He can't just. Without consulting us, we had an agreement. Harry remained seated, staring at the headline as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. He rubbed his face with both hands, exhaling sharply. He said he wouldn't go that far, he whispered. He promised me after the coronation that he'd never take it that far. But promises in the royal family are like mist. They look solid from afar, but vanish when you reach for them. The silence between them stretched. Then Meghan stopped pacing and turned sharply toward him. We need to respond before the narrative gets away from us. They're painting this like we were stripped because of something we did wrong. We need to remind people this was our choice, our freedom. Harry looked up slowly, eyes red. It wasn't our choice, Meg. Not this time. That single sentence hit harder than anything. Because deep down, both of them knew it was true. For all the interviews, for all the declarations about independence and peace, some part of them had clung to the illusion that they were still royals, just royals on their own terms. Now, even that illusion had been erased. Outside, the California sun blazed bright. But inside the house, the mood was gray and heavy, like a thunderstorm waiting to break. Harry stood and walked out to the balcony overlooking the ocean. For years, that view had been his refuge. the symbol of freedom he'd chosen over palace walls. But today it felt suffocating. He leaned against the railing, phone still in hand. Notifications poured in, news alerts, messages from friends, even calls from journalists pretending to check in. He swiped them all away. Inside, Meghan was still pacing. She was angry now, not just hurt, but enraged. He waited for the right moment, she said, her voice sharp. He waited until after everything settled, after we stopped responding to the tabloids, and then he drops this, right when we're about to relaunch our media projects. Harry turned back toward her. You think he planned the timing? She laughed bitterly. Of course he did. You think it's coincidence this happened the same week the king's approval ratings dipped? He needed a distraction, a show of strength. So he used us. Her words were like daggers, but they made a kind of sense. The monarchy had always been about image. If Charles wanted to look strong and decisive, publicly cutting ties with his rebellious son was a powerful way to do it. Still, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just political. It was personal. The tone of that statement, the finality of it. It wasn't the palace talking. It was his father. He dialed a number, his father's private office. It rang twice before someone picked up. Clarence House, said a calm voice. It's Harry, he said quickly. I need to speak to my father. His Majesty is occupied, sir, came the response. Would you like to leave a message? Harry's jaw tightened. No, I'll call back. He hung up. The air between him and Meghan grew heavy. She folded her arms, her voice lower now. You can't let him silence you. If he wants to make this official, then we need to make our side official too. A documentary. An interview. Something that tells the truth before they twist it. Harry stared at her, torn. Meg, every time we speak, it makes things worse. And every time we stay silent, she shot back, they win. The argument hung there, half strategy, half grief. Two people trying to protect themselves from a system they once believed they could escape. Harry walked away again, running a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted. I just wanted peace, he said under his breath. Meghan turned, her voice trembling now. Peace doesn't exist for people like us. They won't ever stop unless we make them. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was fear. Fear that the royal family had finally drawn a line they couldn't cross back over. By afternoon, the world's media had surrounded their home. Helicopters circling above, paparazzi gathered at the gated entrance, shouting questions through megaphones. Neighbors complained, guards tightened security, and the couple retreated deeper into the estate. That night, as California turned gold with sunset, the Sussexes sat in the dim light of their living room, laptops open, headlines flashing across screens. Every outlet had a different take, some sympathetic, others brutal. King Charles reclaims authority. Harry and Meghan lose last royal connection. End of the Sussex experiment. Each line hit like a hammer. At one point, Meghan closed her laptop with a loud snap. I can't read any more of this, she said, rubbing her temples. It's like they're celebrating. Harry didn't respond. He just stared at the last photo he had of himself and his father together, the coronation rehearsal. Both smiling, but only for the cameras. Behind the smiles, the tension had already been there, simmering. Now it had finally exploded into reality. After a long silence, Harry spoke again, his voice quiet. I don't know who I am anymore. Meghan turned to him. You're Harry. You're still Diana's son. He shook his head. No, not to them. To them, I'm just the problem they erased. For the first time that day, Meghan had no answer. The clock ticked softly in the background. The children were asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware that their parents' world had just shifted forever. Meghan reached for Harry's hand. We'll get through this. We always do. He wanted to believe her. He really did. But something inside him whispered that this time, things were different. This wasn't a tabloid headline or a public feud. This was official, permanent. That night, long after Meghan went to bed, Harry sat alone in the kitchen, scrolling through old messages on his phone, texts from William, old voicemails from his father, even a single message from his grandmother, the late Queen. Her voice, calm and steady, echoed in his mind. When duty and family clash, remember who you are. But who was he now? A royal with no title, a son with no father, a man trapped between two worlds that no longer wanted him. The phone buzzed again, an unknown number from London. He hesitated, then answered. Harry, said a familiar voice. It's Clive, from your father's office. Harry straightened. What do you want? His Majesty asked me to convey a message. A pause. He hopes, in time, you'll understand that this was necessary. Harry's voice hardened. Necessary for who? For him or for the family's image? Both, Clive said softly. And for the future. The line went dead. Harry dropped the phone on the counter, staring into the darkness. Somewhere outside, waves crashed against the cliffs, a reminder that no matter how far he ran, the tide always came back. Upstairs, Meghan stirred. She woke briefly, sensing the emptiness beside her, and called his name. But he didn't answer, because in that moment, something in him shifted. Not anger, not even sorrow. Something colder, a realization that perhaps, for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be cut off. The headlines would keep spinning. The interviews would come. The public would take sides. But the truth, the quiet truth, was simpler than any of it. A son had lost his title. A father had lost his son. And neither knew how to find their way back. What neither of them realized, though, was that someone else inside the palace was already preparing to escalate the situation. A move that would expose the full scale of betrayal behind the king's decision. And when that secret finally reached Harry, it would ignite the next stage of the royal war. Because this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The night was thick with silence. Not even the ocean could drown out the sound of it. The palace statement had been out for barely 24 hours, but to Harry it felt like weeks. The phones had stopped ringing. The reporters had left the gates. Even Meghan had gone quiet, retreating into the part of herself that strategized when she was hurt. But Harry couldn't think in strategies anymore. He could only feel the hollow ache in his chest where his family used to be. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. One name stared back at him. Dad. How many times had he deleted and re-added that contact over the past few years? Too many to count. Every time he tried to move on, some part of him refused to let go. Now, staring at that single word, he wasn't thinking about kings or crowns. He was thinking about the man who used to hold his hand walking into church, the man who tried, however awkwardly, to be both father and heir in a world that allowed no softness. He didn't plan to call. He just did. The line rang once. Twice. He almost hung up before it connected. There was a rustle, then a voice, measured, familiar, but edged with fatigue. Harry. For a moment, neither spoke. The distance between California and London felt like an entire lifetime. Dad, Harry said finally, his voice raw. I need to understand why you did this. A long pause. You already know why. No, Harry said, standing. I know the statement, the politics, the duty. But that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking why you, my father, did it. The sound of breathing on the other end, slow and deliberate. Because I had to. You chose to, Harry shot back. You didn't have to make it permanent. You could have called me. You could have told me yourself before the world knew. I sent word, the king replied, calm but detached. Through proper channels. Harry laughed bitterly. Proper channels? I'm your son, not your employee. That's precisely the problem, isn't it? Charles said, his tone sharpening. You stopped being my son when you made yourself a public brand. Harry froze. The words landed like a blow. For a few seconds he couldn't speak. Then anger surged through the numbness. I left because I wanted peace, he said. You knew what that life was doing to us. The press, the scrutiny, it was killing me, Dad. You saw it. I saw you abandon everything you were born into. Charles replied quietly. You left the crown, not because of duty or pain, but because you wanted to rewrite the rules in your own favor. Harry clenched his jaw. That's not fair. You think I wanted this war? I just wanted to live my life without the palace deciding who I was allowed to love, what I was allowed to say. And now look where that's brought us, the king said. You claim independence, yet you still use the name we gave you, the titles we bestowed, the attention we earned for you. How independent is that, really? There it was, the edge beneath his father's composure. It wasn't cruelty. It was disappointment. That old, suffocating disappointment that had haunted their relationship for years. Harry's hand shook as he paced the room. So this is it then? You erase me to protect the brand. I protect the monarchy, Charles said. You were born into it. You know what that means. I also know what it's done to everyone it touches, Harry snapped. It chewed up Mom. It's chewing up you. That name, Mom, hung between them like a ghost neither could face. Charles's tone softened. Don't use her memory as a weapon. I'm not, Harry said. I'm reminding you of what she taught us. She said love mattered more than image. She said truth mattered more than appearances. But here you are, hiding behind the same system that broke her. Silence. Then the king spoke again, voice low, almost trembling. You think this was easy for me? You think I haven't questioned every step? I have. But a monarch's love must come second to his duty. Always. Harry swallowed hard. Then you've already lost. Because if you can't be a father first, you're not much of a king. There was an audible inhale on the line, sharp and pained. You forget yourself, Henry. I'm not Henry to you anymore, am I? Harry whispered. Not since you took the name away. I didn't take your name, Charles replied, tired now. You gave it up when you left. Harry's voice cracked. I didn't leave you, Dad. I left them. The courtiers, the cameras, the lies. But you left me. For a moment, all that came through the line was the sound of two men breathing. The silence of love twisted into something neither knew how to fix. Finally, Charles spoke again. What would you have me do? Pretend the crown doesn't exist? Pretend the rules don't apply because you're hurting? I'd have you remember you're a father, Harry said softly. That's all I ever needed. The king didn't answer. Harry sat down again, exhausted, his anger collapsing into something heavier. I don't want your throne, he said. I never did. I just wanted to be seen, not as a headline, not as a scandal, just as your son. On the other end, Charles's voice trembled almost imperceptibly. You were always my son, even when you made it impossible. Harry felt the tears before he realized he was crying. Then why does it feel like you've buried me? The king didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his words came measured and slow, the way someone speaks when they've already made peace with the pain they're causing. Because sometimes, Charles said, we must bury the part of ourselves that keeps us from ruling the rest. The line went dead silent. Harry waited for more. A word, a sigh, anything. But nothing came. Dad, he said softly, please just talk to me. But the king had already ended the call. For a long time, Harry sat there, the phone still pressed to his ear. The world felt eerily still. No sound but the distant hum of the ocean. His reflection in the dark window looked unfamiliar, a man stripped of everything that once defined him. He replayed the words in his mind. You stopped being my son when you made yourself a brand. He wanted to hate his father for saying it. But part of him wondered if, in his own desperate attempt to escape the monarchy, he'd become exactly what his father feared, a man performing authenticity for cameras instead of family. Meghan found him there an hour later, still motionless, staring at nothing. Did you talk to him? She asked carefully. Harry nodded once, without looking at her. What did he say? That he had to do it. Meghan's face hardened. Of course he did. That's what they always say had to. Duty, image, protocol. Never love. Harry didn't reply. He couldn't. He felt the words tightening in his chest, choking him. She sat beside him and reached for his hand, but he pulled away, quietly. Harry, she began, her tone softening. He's never going to understand. You can't keep expecting him to be something he's not. Harry's voice was barely audible. He used to be my dad, before he was king. Meghan hesitated. And now you have to be your own man. He looked at her finally, eyes hollow. What if I don't know how? She didn't answer. They sat in silence, two people who had escaped one prison only to find themselves trapped in another. One built not of walls, but of memory and regret. Later that night, after Meghan went to bed, Harry walked outside barefoot. The air was cool, the sky heavy with stars. Somewhere across the world, he imagined his father looking out a palace window at that same night sky, both of them trapped under it, but separated by oceans and pride. He dialed the number again. Once, twice. But this time, the line didn't even ring. It went straight to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He just listened to the automated voice, sterile and cold. Then he hung up and whispered to no one. I'm sorry. The apology dissolved into the wind. Back in London, King Charles sat alone at his desk, staring at his own phone. He hadn't turned it off. He'd silenced it. He couldn't bring himself to hear the sound of his son's voice again, not tonight. He'd done what needed to be done, but the price was starting to settle in. He opened the drawer beside him and pulled out a small framed photograph. Diana with her boys at Balmoral, all laughter and sunlight. He touched the glass with trembling fingers. Forgive me, he whispered to the image. But the picture didn't answer, and neither did the silence. Back in Montecito, Harry poured himself a drink, staring into the amber swirl like it might hold an answer. He thought about calling William, but he knew that line was even colder than his father's. So instead, he did what he'd always done when he couldn't sleep. He opened the old box at the back of his closet. Inside were remnants of another life, medals, letters, and a single note from his grandmother, written in her unmistakable handwriting. "Remember, Harry, forgiveness is a stronger weapon than anger." He laughed bitterly. "Not in this family, Gran," he murmured. He set the note down, rubbing his face with both hands. Everything felt heavier now. The silence, the memories, the sense that something irreversible had happened. And yet, even as he sat there surrounded by ghosts, something inside him flickered. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was defiance. The same fire that had made him leave the palace in the first place. If his father had declared war, then Harry would fight it his way. Through truth, through exposure, through the only weapon he had left, his voice. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that someone close to him was about to hand the palace exactly what it needed to destroy that voice completely. And when the betrayal came, it would make this phone call look like mercy, because the king may have ended the conversation. But the battle between father and son had only just begun. The house was silent, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that hums, alive with unspoken rage. Meghan stood at the window, staring out into the California night, the city lights scattered below like 1,000 distant flashbulbs. Somewhere out there, the world was talking about her again. They were always talking, but this time it wasn't the way she wanted. The headlines from London glowed on her phone screen. King Charles cuts off the Sussexes. End of royal privilege. Meghan Markle loses her crown. She tossed the phone onto the couch and pressed her palms to her temples. The room felt too small, too suffocating, even in the expanse of luxury she'd built around herself. Anger pulsed through her veins, not the dramatic kind that explodes in tears or shouts, but the cold, calculated kind that makes plans. Harry was still outside somewhere, lost in his grief. Meghan didn't want grief. She wanted control. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat down, breathing through the tremor in her chest. For years, she had built her public image piece by piece. Poised interviews, strategic charity appearances, Netflix deals crafted with glossy sincerity. Every smile, every soundbite, every tear was designed to reclaim power from the narrative she believed had been stolen from her. And now, in one statement from Buckingham Palace, King Charles had snatched it all away. "No," she whispered. "Not again." The fire in her eyes sharpened. She wasn't going to let the monarchy win, not this time. If the king wanted war, she'd show him what it looked like outside the walls of Buckingham Palace. She grabbed her phone again, not to doom scroll this time, but to call people. Her people. First, her publicist. Straight to voicemail. Then her lawyer, still awake, thankfully. "James," she said the moment he answered. "We need to talk about response strategy. Tonight." "Response to what, exactly?" he said cautiously. "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You've seen it. Everyone's seen it." The king made it permanent. A long exhale. "Yes, I've read it. I want a full review of what they can and can't do. The HRH removal, can we challenge it? Can we appeal it under the original agreement?" "Legally." James paused. "It's complicated. The titles are royal prerogative, Meghan. The courts don't interfere with that. So, in other words, he can do whatever he wants. Within the bounds of tradition and constitutional authority, yes." She gritted her teeth. "Then we hit back another way." "Which means?" "Media," she said. "If he's going to strip us of everything publicly, then the public needs to see who he really is. We control the narrative now." James hesitated. "Meghan, you're playing with fire. You've seen how quickly this kind of story turns." "I am the story," she said sharply, "and I'm done letting them tell it for me." She ended the call before he could argue. The decision was made. She opened her laptop, pulling up her contact list, producers, journalists, media allies. There were more than enough people willing to listen if she was willing to speak. And this time, she wouldn't hold back. Still, beneath the anger, something else churned, a pulse of fear. What if the king's move wasn't just symbolic? What if this was only step one in something bigger? The monarchy never acted without reason. What was Charles protecting? What was he hiding? She stared at the screen, mind racing. Somewhere deep down, She knew that the most dangerous thing wasn't the loss of Her Royal Highness. It was losing relevance. Without royal titles, without that connection to the institution she'd once defied, who was she to the world? A duchess in name only. A celebrity without a crown. That thought terrified her more than anything. Outside, she heard footsteps, Harry returning from his walk. He entered quietly, his expression empty, drained. "You talked to him," she said flatly. He nodded. "And?" "He said it was necessary." Meghan laughed, a hard, bitter sound. "Of course he did. He's always necessary. Duty before decency." Harry didn't answer. He looked like a man half present, the conversation still replaying in his head. Meghan watched him for a moment, then stepped closer. "You can't let him get away with this," she said. "We can't just disappear." Harry sighed. "What do you want me to do, Meg? Storm Buckingham Palace?" "No," she said, lowering her voice. "We fight back with the truth. Our truth. If the palace wants to strip us of our titles, fine. But we tell the world why. We tell them what really happens behind those walls. The things they still don't know." Harry frowned. "You mean another interview?" She hesitated. "Something bigger. A series. Something that can't be spun or edited by them. Full control. Our version of events." He turned away. "We've done that before. It didn't change anything. It kept us relevant," she countered. The word hung there, relevant. He hated it. "You're not hearing me," Harry said quietly. "I don't care about relevance. I care about peace." She exhaled sharply. "And I care about survival." They stared at each other in silence. Then Meghan's tone softened, shifting from sharp to persuasive. "Harry, if we stay quiet, they win. People will believe we did something wrong. That's what they want. We can't let your father define who we are." He looked at her for a long moment, torn between exhaustion and loyalty. "So what do you want to do?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Tell the world what really happened the night we left London. The deal they offered us. The threats they made." Harry blinked. "You still have that recording?" She gave a small, knowing smile. "I keep everything." For the first time that night, Harry's anger cracked into fear. "Meg, if you leak that." "I'm not leaking anything," she said calmly. "I'm strategically releasing it. There's a difference." "Not to them." She shrugged. "Then let them come for me." He shook his head. "You don't understand. My father's patient. But William isn't. You exposed the wrong thing, and he'll make sure the whole establishment buries us alive. Then they'll prove me right," she said simply. "Every time they try to silence me, they make me louder." The defiance in her eyes burned brighter than the fear in his. Harry sat down, running a hand through his hair. "You think you can win this?" "I don't need to win," she said. "I just need to remind the world that they're not untouchable." Her phone buzzed, an incoming message from an old contact at a streaming network. She read it quickly, her lips curving into a thin smile. "Looks like they're interested in hearing what I have to say." Harry groaned. "You already started?" "This isn't impulsive," she said, which was half a lie. "It's necessary." He looked at her, weary but resigned. He'd seen that look before, the same one she had before every public battle. Once she decided to fight, there was no stopping her. "Do what you have to," he muttered. "Just leave me out of it this time." But Meghan knew she couldn't. Without Harry, there was no story. And without the story, there was no power. After he went upstairs, she stayed awake until dawn, drafting outlines, jotting ideas, even rehearsing potential opening lines in front of a mirror. Every word needed to sting without sounding bitter, reveal without incriminating. It wasn't just revenge, it was image management, war by narrative. By the time the sun rose, she had a plan. A multi-phase campaign. Phase 1. Reclaim public sympathy with a heartfelt exclusive that framed her as the misunderstood woman wronged by the monarchy's coldness. Phase 2. Release snippets of the old recording, just enough to cause uproar without crossing legal boundaries. Phase 3. Unveil the truth about how the royal family had allegedly manipulated the original Megxit agreement to make them look ungrateful. Each move designed to hit a nerve, to draw the palace out of silence and into defense. Because once the palace defended itself publicly, the illusion of royal dignity cracked, and that was the one thing Charles couldn't afford. She closed her laptop and smiled faintly. For the first time since the announcement, she felt power returning to her fingertips. But what she didn't realize was that her plan wasn't secret for long. One of her trusted PR contacts had already forwarded her email draft to a royal correspondent. Off the record, of course. Within 48 hours, whispers would reach London about Meghan's revenge project. And when King Charles heard what she was planning, he wouldn't sit quietly. Because if Meghan wanted a media war, the palace had an army of its own. And in that battle, truth wouldn't matter. Only survival. But before that first shot was fired, something unexpected happened. Something that would throw Meghan's entire strategy into chaos. Because the next move in this royal war wasn't hers at all. It belonged to someone she never thought would betray her.